You can see there, this is 1914 Serbien Serbien. This is part of the series of games, 1914 series of games by GMT. This is the latest in that series. This came out a couple of years ago. It's a one mapper with quite a relatively low counter density. The earlier games in this series, it started with 1914 Twilight in the East about 10 years ago, and that's a bit of a monster. War on the World War I on the Eastern Front in 1914. Then a couple of years back, 1914 Offensive à Outrance, which was World War I on the Western Front. Here we have 1914 Serbien Serbien, which is the very beginnings of World War I, the Austro-Hungarian attacks into Serbia. And on this beautiful map, the Austro-Hungarians are these blue counters stretching round along this Donau river, and down here Sarajevo in there, and then the tan counters, which on the camera are a little bit harder to pick out, are the Serbio and Montenegrin forces. These light tans, I believe, are the Montenegrins, and the slightly darker ones are the Serbians across over there. Now, you'll notice some blanks covering some of these counters. This is where I've been marking things up because certain Serbian forces aren't active on game turn 0. This is a 40 turn game. 40 turn game, that's really quite significant, even though it's a one mapper, and like I say, it was only 2 or 3 counter sheets, I think. It's still 40 turns and interfaces between, so you can see there's going to be 12 interfaces in here as well, so it's a 52 turn game really. That's pretty significant. Reluctant Enemies was a one mapper, the OCS game, and I knew what I was doing with that, and it was still, it took me plenty of time to get through it, so this is, deceptive. I think it might be a one map game and not a monster game, but there's plenty of time to be consumed here trying to work out what's going on. Now, I have to say, I read this rule book twice. It's a 32-page rule book, but that's the sequence of play. It's got an index in it, blah blah blah, credits, so it's 29 pages, cover page, 28 pages maybe. That oughtn't to be too bad, but it's quite a dense 28 pages, and for someone new to the system, it has concepts and terminology and things going on in it that I'm just not used to, and which are really quite hard to grasp. And I'll give an indication, I'll give some examples of what I mean there. If we look at some counters. Well, no, the rule book. Let's just say the rule book says things like there are different types of units. There are asset units and there are formation units. And you go, okay, what does that mean? What's the difference? Why do I need to know this? And it says, well, an asset unit doesn't have a formation marker, and a formation unit does have a formation marker, but it doesn't explain conceptually or anything why you care. What difference is that making to me? Is a formation a division and an asset a brigade? Is there something that distinguishes them? No, it's just one has a formation marker and the other one doesn't. And then it says a force is either 2 assets or a formation and an asset. I don't understand the difference between formations and assets, except that they're a way of distinguishing between various game components. But in terms of what you're trying to tell me about the gameplay, what does this all mean? And so, without it all set up in front of you, it's really, really hard to start getting past some of these definitional problems and actually translating the rules into a sort of mental picture of gameplay. And I've found that process with this game harder than anything I think I've ever played. And I've picked up OCS without any problem at all. I've learned ASL without any problem at all. But this Maybe I'm getting older, but this has just been something of a slog. And I think it is because there's this real interplay between the rule book and the components that make it very, very hard to learn just by sitting in an armchair and reading the rule book, which is what I tend to do to begin with. So here, for example, let's take that blank off there. Here you can see Mokragora. The 11 in a circle means that that's an asset unit, and that 11 is its combat efficiency level or something. In other words, that will be a number used to test whether it starts getting disorganised and demoralised and all kinds of things. As that number goes, you'll start putting counters on that, a -1, a -2, a -3, and then it'll become disorganised, and then it'll become demoralised, and that's showing you its state of organisation. And then the 343 is like its attack strength, its efficiency, essentially its efficiency rating or its organisational rating or something, troop quality. And then the 3, I believe, is its defence rating. Yeah, so that is an asset, if I pop that back on there. Whereas this, Sumadia 2, that's a formation because it doesn't have that circled 11 or circled 10. Instead, it has its own separate marker over on this chart. It happens to be there in the Ozici group, and that's showing you that Sumadia is part of a larger formation called the Ozici group, and that it's a division, 2 X's, with an 11 CEL, combat efficiency level. And it's part of that larger group there, which doesn't seem to matter too much to the Serbians, but it matters greatly to the Austro-Hungarian groups because they are divided not just by armies but then into corps, and the way they can get supply is only via the proper organisational routes. So a unit over here in the 13th Corps of the 5th Army can take supply from the 13th Corps or the 5th Army, but not from the 15th Corps or the 6th Army, and so on. So essentially you've got these sort of organisational display cards where you're showing and shifting around how your army is actually organised, and then you've got the counters, the respective counters, doing the moving around and the fighting on the map. So you've got this dual system of army organisation and corps organisation and so on, and then fighting. Okay, once you've got the components on the board, that starts to make sense, but without them on the board, that is a real mess. I've got these strips of cardboard which you're putting down. These are dividing up the Austro-Hungarian armies. So this is the 2nd Army, I believe this is the 5th Army, and down here I think this is the 6th Army. The Serbians have a more fluid structure where they're essentially all the same army, and that simplifies their supply arrangements quite considerably. Okay, so that's an example of some of the difficulties when you read the rule book. But as I've gone on, new things have popped up. The next thing I would look at, having set the game up, is, okay, what am I trying to achieve? What does winning the game look like for either side? You have a victory point track up here, and it works very much like Twilight Struggle. In other words, it's a sort of relative track. So if the Serbs get a victory point, they would go on to Serb VP 1, and then if the Austro-Hungarians got 2 back, then you'd move them back down to 0, and then you'd flip this over and the Austro-Hungarians would have 1, and so on. And so you know it's measuring the difference in victory points between the two sides, and at the end of the game you're trying to end up with 10 more than your opponent. So you want plus 10 after the dust is settled and all the turns are done. Great. How do I get victory points? Well, there's a really complicated point salad for how you get victory points. The Austro-Hungarians have various locations that they're trying to take with the 5th Army and the 6th Army. How close they get to taking them before giving up the plan to try and take them determines how many victory points they lose. They're trying to get eastward into Serbia. They subtract they take the column number that they get to, which say here would be 33, here would be 32, here would be 34. They take that number, they subtract 20 from it. That's how many victory points they get. But they can only do that if they need a formation unit occupying a hex. They can't use asset units to do that. So, for example, Banat here with the 9 in the circle is an asset unit. So if Banat slides across the river here into hex row 13 or column 39, that is not 19 points because a asset unit cannot score the points. It has to be a formation, such as the 14th Brigade here. So if the 14th Brigade, which is a formation, were to make it across the river here, outside Beograd, 28 minus 20, that would be 8 points for the Austro-Hungarians. Great. What else? Well, they can take cities, they can take Beograd, which is worth 10 points. Sabac there is worth a point a turn, so it's worth 40 points, and I'm rather concerned about that. It seems to me if the Austro-Hungarians take that, then they have no obligation to do anything else all game. They can sit there, rack up a point a turn and win. And force the Serbians onto the attack, which seems absolutely crazy to me. But that's how it is. We'll see how it goes. The Serbians can get points for taking a couple of towns up in here, I think. I don't know which ones, but they're worth 10 points each. I think Dek there, I think, is worth 10 points, and there's another one, I think Drenovac maybe, or maybe this Mitrovic, I'm not sure. But there's a couple of towns worth, and they're worth some points. And Sarajevo, if they want to fight through the entirety of the 6th Army with their 3 asset units, they can get 15 points from that. I think these objectives are, frankly, completely unattainable. They're just there to stop the Austro-Hungarian player from just shifting the entire 6th Army into a completely different region of the board. I don't actually think these are viable sources of points. So I think mainly the Serbians are trying to cost the Austro-Hungarians points. And like I say, this point a turn for Sabac could, like I said, if this entire 2nd Army decides to just, shift across and take Sabac, I'm not entirely sure what the Serbians are supposed to do about that. So again, another difficulty I'm having is constructing any sort of feasible first turn plans of action for either side, because with this big point salad soup thing that's going on, I have no idea what winning the game actually looks like. I cannot conceptualise what a victory looks like militarily for either side. This is proving to be a right handful. Now, I sound like I'm having a colossal moan about it. I'm sure it's a really nuanced, interesting game. I actually think this concept of having your army organisation fluid and being able to adapt this is a really cool thing. I'm sure that this gradual reduction of these combat effectiveness levels and the combat system looks like it's quite attritional. Obviously, you can dig trenches, or they're called improved positions in this game. So there's a lot of tactics in terms of setting up good positions and using zones of control well, organising your supply well. I'm sure there's a lot to it. It is on a par, a sort of World War I OCS with slightly more constrained supply rules and these organisational charts. It's that sort of order of complexity, and it does look quite exciting, but I am really struggling to get going on it simply because of the difficulties I'm having. So to continue with that, I actually started trying to go through this preliminary phase, place reinforcements, where we didn't have any. It was turn 0. Players note if any special events were concerned. No, it's turn 0. Joint preliminary phase. Players note if any strategic plans have been achieved. No, it's the start of the game. the Austro-Hungarian player may abandon his army's strategic plans. No, he doesn't want to. That would cost him. He can't. He can't. He's the Austro-Hungarian has a obligation to make a certain number of attacks with a particular army before it's even allowed to abandon its plans. So that can't happen. Both players activate all units scheduled to be activated this game turn. Okay, so I've put the blanks on the Austro-Hungarian, on the Serbians, which won't be activated. Right. Attachment phase, designate each army's area of attachment boundaries. So I did that with the cardboard here. Bang. Alright, supply phase. Flip any supply units that are on their extended mode side to their front sides and remove all ammo provided markers. Right. If you're going to ask me to do that as the first actual thing I do in the game, why in fuck's name did you ask me to set up units in extended mode during setup? If the first thing I'm going to then do with them is flip them back to unextended. All that meant was I had to go across the map and find the fucking supply depots and flip the bloody things back to their unextended side. I find it pretty... I think the designer's taking the piss, asking you to set things up and then the first thing you do is flip them back. That really isn't particularly user-friendly now, is it? At that point, I kind of went, oh, for fuck's sake, you've got to be kidding me. And then determine the supply state of all friendly units. So having done that, having flipped the units you got me to set up the wrong way up, I've now got to work out where every single unit on the board is getting its supply from. And at that point, I said, you know what, right now, I can't be fucking bothered. I really cannot be bothered. So that's where I'm up to in this game. Turn 0, determine the supply state of all friendly units. Because having done that, I will then have to work out whether the supply depots need to be flipped to their extended side in order to get to supply to certain areas of the board or not. Really? Okay. So this is where I'm at. I've got to now reread the supply section and go round the board, applying it to every single unit until I've got my head round how supply works in the game before we can move on. So when I've got an hour to sit down with this and get my head into the supply rules, that will be what's waiting for me. I'm sure it won't be as painful as I'm making it sound right now, but it is vexing me. Okay, so I've just started with Serbien Serbien. I'm going through the sequence of play. Hello, baby. Yeah, hello. Oh, yeah, listen to that. Yeah. So I'm going through the sequence of play. I've done the supply phase for the Serbians who go first each turn, so it's game turn 0. It's the Serbian phase, and now they're into their movement phase. And this is the point at which we have to try and come up with some sort of plan, and that's close to impossible. As you know, I think we're largely going to have to respond to what the Austro-Hungarians do, partly because everything that's on the front line is inactive on game turn 0, so that's no good to me. So all this stuff with blanks on the front line here, all inactive, you know. And these Montenegrin units, they're also inactive, but I ran out of blanks. So the amount of stuff we've actually got to move is limited. This Obrenovic is a garrison unit, and the 2 in the little hexagon is how far it can move from Obrenovac, so that can barely move. So apart from shifting some of this stuff sort of slowly towards where we assume the front line will be, there isn't a great deal for us to do, that I can see. I'd like to try and take Sabac, but I've got nothing I can get there, so that's automatically going to fall to the Austro-Hungarians, and that's going to be a victory point every turn for them. That would appear then to put the actually put the onus of attack on us, the Serbians that I'm playing at the moment. It appears that the Serbians are the attackers in this situation because the Austro-Hungarians take Sabac and then sit there, dig in and sit there, rack up their point a turn and win, unless we do something about it. And I'm not entirely sure what we're supposed to do. It seems odd to me, that. Yeah, so I really don't know what I'm going to do. So I'm starting down here with this unit at Lim, which is on the most tenuous supply possible. It comes out of Serbia here. This Zici extended supply comes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 into this hex because we've both got zones of control into it. So we can trace into there 5, 6, 7, 8. If we try and trace supply down this route, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Can't make it. So the moment this unit in the counter movement phase comes into here, for example, and other stuff moves forward, this is going to be cut out of supply. So unless I'm reading this wrong, unless these hexes down here act as a supply source, but it seems to be just Montenegrin units that do that, even though this supply thing is in Serbia. I don't understand that either. I'm going to have a look at that because nothing's making sense. Okay, so it is only Montenegrin units that can trace supply from these map edge hexes. So that means that this Lim unit is in danger of being, the moment this hex gets taken, actually occupied by an Austro-Hungarian unit, this road is blocked and then there's no way to trace supply to it. So this unit from Lim is going to fall back along this road, which is going to cost 3 movement points to there, 6 movement points to there, and then 9 movement points to there. And I'll flip him around just to show he's moved. And I'm going to have to continue with this process and see if I can make any sense of it. This I'm not entirely sure where to send some of this stuff. I think I'm going to concentrate on this stuff along the road and just start seeing how far I can get it in this direction while it's in supply, but I'm not going to do that on camera because it's going to be pretty slow and painstaking, and I can't really concentrate on doing it while I'm filming. Okay, so Serbia have done what they can to start constructing some sort of perimeter. You saw me move this unit, this Lim unit, back here, not because it's a better position defensively, still in high mountains, still going to be pretty tough to crack, but it's got a far more robust supply line back up to this depot here. And then there was some moves in here by Drina, the Drina, whatever that is. I can't remember what it is. Division, yeah, and regiment there to try and that's the extent of their movement. Movement costs in this are pretty high, 2 or 3 per hex, 4 for the mountains, 3 along roads. You get 9 movement points. You can force march for a bonus 3 movement if you're infantry, but if you do that, you have to roll against your effectiveness level, in other words the 11, with a +1 in a circle on that unit, with a +1 for each bonus movement point you took. So if you took all 3, you'd have to roll 2d6 +3 and try and get less than 11, or you start losing CEL, and that's bad. So we didn't risk that too much. The Sumadia 1 here has a CEL of, I think, 11. And yes, it does. And they made a roll. They took an extra movement point to get there and made a roll. The other people that made a roll, if I come across here, this cavalry division was stationed down here at Groka, I think, or maybe where Timok 1 is. But anyway, he had to spend an extra couple of movement points to get into Belgrade and help the defence of that, because it's a key location for the Austro-Hungarians. They certainly don't want to lose it. That was the only thing I could get in to defend it with. So that's what happened. And yeah, moved some units here up to the river line, started shifting stuff. Quite how this plays out with these tiny Banat formations, I really don't know. We'll see when it comes to the Austro-Hungarians how their movement and supply situation works in terms of creating trouble in these big sort of sparsely defended areas. Obviously a move up towards Sabac over here, but the these units that are inactive can't really do anything. So now the Austro-Hungarians get 5 movement points to make counter moves. Now 5 movement points, as I say, with the movements costing a minimum of 2, usually 3 or 4, and then extra to move into enemy zones of control. That's not very much movement. 5 movement points. It sounds a lot, but it really isn't. For example, I assumed that this division here, 1st Division here in the 6th Army, would be able to move into Vardiste, however that's pronounced, in this counter move phase. But if we have a look, that is along a road in high mountains. And into an enemy zone of control. So, no, actually it's not. Is it high mountains? I think it might be. I think it's low mountains. Actually, I think this darker stuff here is high mountains. This is impassable. This is high mountain. So this will be low mountain. So he's currently in foothills. That is, and rough. And he's going to be moving up here into low mountain. Well, let's hope the camera wasn't too bad. Low mountain would normally be 4. I think the road through the mountain will make it 3. So he can move up the road for 3 into an enemy zone of control. Is +2. So yeah, he can do that for 5 movement points as far as I can see. So, but you can see, you know, you can shift 1 hex. This terrain is very unforgiving. So it's a question of what the Austro-Hungarians can actually accomplish. And again, in terms of making it even across the river, this is the Sava River, and that's +3 to cross by the looks of things. Yeah. We'll see. We'll see how it looks in terms of tracing supply across it as well, because all these things are going to get slightly awkward. So I've got a little bit more rules rechecking to get my head around exactly what the Austro-Hungarian forces are capable of, given the supply situation for them and the complications caused by mountain hexes and river hexes, which are quite severe usually. Okay, so I've been making, well no, I haven't made any mistakes, but There are also some Austro-Hungarian units that are not active on this game turn 0, and this unit here that I was planning to move into Vardiste here and cut the supply down into Lim is inactive. That means that that move can't happen. That means that the Lim unit didn't need to withdraw to maintain its supply line. So I've just corrected all this based on the fact that this isn't active. So I'm still down here grappling with the sort of supply situation with this 6th Army and how it's going to attempt to move forward, and then I've got the same to do with the 5th and the 2nd Army, and I've flipped all the currently inactive units the wrong way up like this just so that I don't move them in error. And I'll press onward and see, just shuffle these Austro-Hungarians around their 5 movement points. Okay, so I have the movement phase and counter movement phase in the Serbian portion of the turn done. Woohoo! Still don't know what I'm doing, obviously, but let's just throw some charts around. But down here, oh yeah, I've used these cubes as well, these coloured cubes, to mark up the primary and secondary objectives of the Austro-Hungarian armies. So this 6th Army here is trying to, its primary objective is the white cube in there, and its secondary objectives are the blue cubes there. And whenever a unit moves, one that isn't knackered, combat ineffective or demoralised or whatever, but a functional combat unit has to move at least 1 hex closer to one of its objective hexes, so they can't shuffle around and withdraw and do things. They have to keep slowly grinding towards these objectives. Similarly up here I've used green and red, so the 2 green and the red are the objective hexes, and not for these guys, that's the objective hexes for these 5th Army units in here, and they are trying to get the green and red hexes in there, obviously aided. This 2nd Army up here doesn't have any limitations placed on it by having objectives, and so obviously that's the sort of free force that they have. So here we have the situation at the end of the movement phase. If I zoom in a little bit, you'll see that not very much has happened. I mean, things are shuffling forward a hex largely in these mountains, because they're 3 to 4 movement points to move through foothills, low mountains, high mountains. Even along roads it's 3 movement points, so unless you want to risk the combat effectiveness level rolls with forced marches, you're only really making a hex in these mountains. And right now the Austro-Hungarians aren't wanting to risk lots of those rolls, or at least I'm not wanting to risk them. So not much happening there. Up here on this river line, they just sort of moved up a little bit. They will make an attack in here. I think this 13th Corps, 36th Division of the 13th Corps there, the top unit, the 13314, were together with this 13th Brigade, which I believe, I'm hoping, is in the same corps. Those will attack into this Loznica unit. I don't think we'll attack up here, because those 2 units cannot combine into an attack because they're from different corps. Up here, this is the other thing, the major thing that happened for the Austro-Hungarians, is they did cross the Sava River in a couple of places, but doing so without a bridge or a pontoon bridge earns you one of these brigade river crossing markers. If you cross and you're a division, you get a divisional one, which is even worse. But these are only brigades. In fact, this is only a regiment under here, but I still think it gets a brigade marker. I'll check that. I'll double check it. That one is a brigade, so that's at -2 strength, but it is holding Sabac, which would be worth a point at the end of the turn. It also activated this unit here because it's moved adjacent to an inactive unit, but it's only a 233 asset unit. It's not particularly strong. So that was the other major moves, and a lot of these are inactive. You can see them flipped upside down. So a lot of this second army wasn't able to move, but they were able to grab Sabach. And yeah, elsewhere, not a lot happening at the moment. So that's the situation. Now I'm going to conduct this attack on behalf of the Austro-Hungarians and see how that all works. So we've got our first combat here, and I'm going to attempt to do it as we go along and see if this all makes sense. So we have 2 units attacking across the Drina River here, which is a major river, into this Loznica unit, which I think, having been attacked, is probably activated. We'll activate it, and I'll check it later, but I'm guessing it is. So, sorry for the camera shake, I'm just having to hold this with my left hand. So the attacking strengths here are 13 for this guy, -2 for the attacking across the river, so he's on 11, and 6 for this guy here, -2 for attacking across the river, so that puts him on 4 for a total of 15. And 15 against a defensive strength of 4 is 15 to 4. Now in most games you'd be kicking yourself and going, damn, I'm 1 factor short of 4 to 1. But this game isn't quite so snarky about exact factor counting, or at least the cut-offs fall in different places, because you can see there on that 3 to 1 it says 2.5 to 3.49. So you round to the nearest, basically, and if it's exactly at the midpoint, then you round up. So 15 to 4 is 3.75 to 1. And so you've made 4 to 1. So what we're going to do now is roll a white dice and a black dice, and the white dice is on that white column there from 1 to 8 on the far left, and then the black dice, I think, are this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 columns down here, and once we've got those, we'll cross-reference across to the 4 to 1 column and get our result. However, the river is also giving us a shift left, so we're actually going to be on the 3 to 1 column. So that's the sort of starting point for combat. I'll try not to move the camera too swiftly. The other thing here is that we have some artillery values. This has an artillery value of 1 on the left here. The attackers have artillery values of quite a lot more than that. This guy's got a 5 on the left there. And this guy's got a 2 on the left, so they've got 7 artillery to 1. Now the Serbians have a shortage of shells, so they have to try and work out whether it's worth having that artillery value of 1 or not. I think it's going to give us a slight advantage to use artillery, so I've used up some of our artillery shells, which are being tracked down here, and it looks like we've only got 25. In fact, we've got 125, but I will only start counting the hundreds once we get down to 0, because I've only got a times 10 and a times 1. So we're down to 24, so for the purposes of this, we will use an artillery shell and see what effect it has. Okay, so we're on the 3 to 1 column. The other thing is we modify the dice rolls. The white dice roll by the difference between our combat sort of this is our sort of efficiency rating in ASL, or our proficiency rating it's called here. So we've got a 4. The highest that the Austro-Hungarians have is a 3 and another 3. So there's a +1 on the white die. Because the smaller, lower numbers, I think, are better, at least on that roll. So we're going to roll a white die and a black die. The white die's got a +1 on it, and we'll see what we come out as. And we've got a 2, 5, which becomes a 3, 5. So 3, 5. Here's the 3. is the 5 across the table on the 3 to 1 column, is a +2 +3 result. Okay, what does that mean? What that means is that there was no well, let me try and get this clear. So the results are the left of the attacker and the right is the defender. So all the forces involved are now going to have to make checks against their combat efficiency level, and the attackers are going to be making those at +2, and the defenders going to be making one at +3. Now, this result on the combat table did not include a retreat result for the defender. No retreat result, which would be those little numbers in black or in white, the 1s and 2s in the circles. Well, it didn't have one of those. It was just a straight 2-3 result in there. So the attacker, because of certain options that were chosen, which I didn't go into, has to take a step loss. Basically, prior to the combat, both attacker and defender decide whether they are going to make it an intense battle or not. If both choose not intense, it's low intensity. Here we had attacker attacking intense and defender not, and so as an attacker intense battle you could have the reverse and a defender intense battle. We could have both choosing intense and it's a high intensity battle, and those basically add casualties, but depending on whether there are retreats or not. And here we had attacker intense, the defender retreats on both black and white retreat results. Attacker suffers an SR if they don't manage to get a retreat result, or a black retreat result. So they didn't get any retreat results, and that means they're going to have to take a step loss. I'll take these attack markers off because they're causing some problems. So they're going to have to take a step loss to begin with. Does this thing have a... okay. So they'll take the step loss on this 13th Brigade here. So that gets flipped and it's got that white stripe now to show that it's taken that step loss. And then everyone's going to have to make some rolls on the combat effectiveness tables to see whether they suffer any sort of demoralization, sort of attritional, organizational disruption kind of results. So the attacker's got to do these on +2, but there are some other modifiers which are let's see, 9.9.2. Okay, so those +2s for the attackers. So the other thing is the artillery values. So this Losnica unit had 1 artillery. And if we come over here on the artillery table, you can see that the number of attacking division equivalents was 1 to 1 3/4. It was actually 1.5. And the Serbians have 1 point of artillery, so that's a -1 artillery DRM instead of -2. So a -1, that shell shifted us up a column. So the overall modifier for each of the attacking units here is a +1, because they had a +2 from the combat table and a -1 for the artillery, for a total of +1. So we'll do the division first. That is and he's got a result of 8 plus 1 is 9. He is the 36th of the 13th Corps, so we'll drop over here, and we can see in here that he's got a 10, so he's going to be fine. The other chap is 13th Brigade, and again, sorry for the camera shift, 13th Brigade has a 10, he's on a +1, we'll give it a dice, and he's got an 8 as well. So no combat effectiveness problems there. And Loznica here, he has got a CEL of, let's see, 10 in there, centre formation marker in there, but he's got a +3, and then we have to check the artillery modifier. And the artillery modifier for him, the opponent, he is less than 3/4 of a division equivalent. He is only a brigade, but he is facing 7 points of artillery. That's another +1 on his roll, so he's on a +4 on this roll, and he's got an 8 +4 is 12, which is 2 higher than his 10. So we can see here, force fails its check. He's failed it by 2. That is going to reduce its combat effectiveness by 1. So that is going to put 1 CEL loss onto the Loznica unit. So we'll find a 1 CE in here, and we'll drop it onto Loznica down there. I could put it underneath, I could put them side by side, I could just drop it. Do you know what? I think I'm gonna kind of nudge it up against there so that I don't have to keep lifting these counters to see what the CEs are. And do it up there as well, because he starts the game with a -1 CE. So I'm just going to do it like that. Okay. And that's the outcome of this thing. So Loznica stays put, holds the river line, is a bit disorganised by the attack, but inflicts some casualties on this 13th Brigade as he tried to cross. That is the opening combat of the game. And yeah, it's quite an interesting combat system there. Quite a lot of steps to it. I'm sure it'll become a bit like OCS. I'm sure it'll become, pretty much second nature. These tables aren't that complicated. It's just a case of getting used to the kind of sequence. But there it is. Just a footnote to this situation here. The rules don't make it clear that Loznica unit is now active despite being attacked. I'm having some trouble with quite a lot of ambiguities in this rules. It says inactive. Some individual units begin a scenario inactive. If a unit is inactive, it cannot move or conduct a task. Great. It does project a zone of control. If an enemy unit moves adjacent to an inactive unit, it is activated. An inactive supply unit can provide supply. Well, great. Nothing moved adjacent to it because these guys start adjacent to it, and the example of play in the playbook makes it quite clear that stuff, that does not activate them. It says I'll find it in this example of play. So here it shows this exact situation that we're dealing with here, and it says all the Serbian players' units that begin in the vicinity of the enemy are inactive for this movement phase. So whether those guys are activated or not by being attacked, I'm really not sure. I wonder if this example of play makes clear, but the rules certainly don't. Sorry, this isn't a very interesting camera shot, is it? But I don't see anything in there. There's lots of procedural stuff about what happens with, you know, the combats that this example of play runs through, which are different from the one I just ran through. But despite all that, nothing indicates whether or not an attacked unit, which is inactive, becomes active. I mean, it starts adjacent to enemy units, inactive, so it remains inactive. It's attacked by those enemy units. Who knows whether it's active or not? Certainly not the designer nor me.